Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. People who have been willing to share their experiences, to tell us about what it is that's helped them find their sense of belonging. And I do say this every week because every week I do mean it, but we have another outstanding guest with us, and it's Lenna Cumberbatch. And Lenna has been working in EDI for the past 25 years. She's an EDI and inclusion strategist and strategies for change. I'm really glad that she has come on and agreed to be our guest. So I'm going to kick off by asking my usual question, which is, can you tell us about what it is that gave you your sense of identity and your sense of belonging as you were growing up?
It's funny because I think there are numerous different times across my life when belonging became an aspect of where I wanted to be and where I wanted to identify. And so figuring out and learning about being Black, for example, meant being different to some people. And I remember that first experience of belonging being an actual experience of exclusion. And so growing up in, for those of you who know Bermondsey in South London in the 80s and 70s and 80s, well, another very nice place for people if you're Black. And so for me, I remember growing up and not feeling particularly different until one day when I was standing at the bus stop after school, and written on the bus stop, it had "Deport all Blacks." And in that moment, I realized that they were talking about me and that I was something other. And that experience of thinking, oh, I'm not like everybody else, because they're not talking about everyone, they're just talking about people like me. That put me into a category, or I think for me, the first time in some ways in terms of my identity. I feel like I grasped onto that aspect of who I am as a part of that, sort of in a almost rebellious way. Okay, well then I'm going to be this thing. This is who I am. This is part of my identity. But it wasn't a real sense of connectedness in that sense and way. I think the first time I really felt a proper sense of belonging was when I came out as a lesbian. I came out at university, and I went to university in America, in Vermont. And it was again a very white environment. My friends who I had made after coming out were all going to the annual LGBTQ+ event happening in New Hampshire that year. And it was the same weekend as the National Organization of Women event happening that weekend in Washington, DC. Now I thought, as much as I wanted to go hang out with my mates, there had to be Black lesbians in DC. I needed to go to DC. So rather than going 50 miles across, state lines, I was going to go 500 miles down to DC instead. And I remember getting there and looking at the program, and yes, there were 2 Black lesbian events happening, and entering this hall and this amazing room full of Black queer folk. And it was I felt like these are my people. This is where I belong. This is everything to me. So I think for me, what I learned in that and understanding was the combination and, the intersectionality of my identities, Black, woman, queer, in that space all at once together. And it coalesced for me in terms of feeling like I belonged.
So that was thank you for that, right? But that was quite a long journey.
Yeah.
That was quite a long journey from one being that teenager or that young child at the bus stop and seeing Blacks should be deported, all Blacks should be deported in Bermondsey in South London, to then going all the way across the channel to America and then finding your identity there. So that's a long time. I'm going to break that down a little bit. Yeah,
let's do it. I'm here for this.
Yeah. let's break it down. So when you were in the UK, what was it that gave you the sense of otherness Other than seeing that poster and stuff, what do you think it was that gave you that sense of being othered?
Yeah, so I guess there are multiple different aspects of my life that I felt like made me feel othered. I was the black kid in my class. At various points, there might have been one other of us in my class, all the way through primary school and through secondary school here. So there was that aspect of it. I was always bullied. Was I bullied because I was the black kid? Was I bullied because I was overweight? Was I bullied because, who knows why? But I was always bullied. And so I remember those aspects of my life. I remember I grew up on an estate in Bermondsey, and we were two black families that I knew of on the whole estate.
Mm.
And I remember being about 9 or 10 years old, and I was held up by a knife point outside of my front door by a 7-year-old. His older brother was in prison. His dad was in prison. I believe they're all National Front Party members. When I grew up in that estate, the whole estate was daubed with NF, 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 NF everywhere. And so I remember once he started picking on me that I was going to stand up. I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. But when you're that age, people want to fit in. And I refused to kowtow, to follow, to bully other kids, to be mean. And that meant more ostracization, whether it was combined or et cetera in that sense. But all of those sorts of things made me stand out. I was also really smart. And so I was in one of the top groups in school. And so we used to set them up into different sets. And so I was in the top level at school. And again, there were 2 black kids in a class of 20 of us in that class. And all the other black kids were in lower levels to me. And I remember in primary school being the kid who would teach the other kids how to read because I'd read all the books already and I had nothing else to do when the other kids were reading. So all of these different things set me apart one way or another. Mm-hmm. And so I can't say to you it was this thing or that thing or that thing. It was I can see
it was a combination.
Yeah, all these different things that combined. Yeah.
So okay, so there's this combination of events, right? Which gave you this sense of being othered. What happened? What was it why was it that you ended up going across to the US? And how old were you when you went across to the US? Because that could be a pivotal time for you.
A couple of my aunts moved to Washington, D.C. when I was really young. And my mum decided to take my brother and I over there as well to follow them. And she said that there were more opportunities for black kids in schools in America than there were in London, in Southwark, where I was growing up. Mm-hmm. I don't know how true that was, but that's the reason we were given at the time. And so it was one of those things where I'd been going to Black Saturday School, I'm sure you know, and a Black Saturday school similar to school. Otherwise, I was helping the other kids learn to read or do their exercises or helping them with their homework or whatever it was. And one of the teachers, when they learned that my mum was taking us to America, said, she said to her that Lenna needs to meet this person when you go over there. She'll make sure she's sorted out. I didn't know what any of this meant. I didn't understand any of it. But what I understand now is that opportunity was a massive influential change in my life in that sense. And so my mum went to meet this person, this black woman, a doctor in America, who said, you need to go to this place and you need to go to that place so you can get that address so you can go to the good DC school. And so again, I was othered again in school because I left when I was 13.
Right.
13 is a horrible time at the best of times. But as a shy kid going to DC, where I was going from an environment which was primarily white to an environment in DC which was primarily black and Hispanic.
Right.
So there's this massive amount of culture shock going on to me. I'm thinking, there are lots of black people everywhere and I don't know what to do with it. And as you know, as much as I spent all this time with my family on the weekends and everything, and
it's a whole new frame of reference.
What is going? I have no idea what's happening here. And I was this kid with a British accent, And I remember many years later, my uncle saying to me, well, yeah, no, when you first got here, I couldn't understand a thing you said. I spent 2 years just nodding my head at everything. I was a chatty kid, so I would just go at home to my family. But and so at school, they just kept asking me, oh, say this. I think the big one, they would say 3 o'clock, say 3 o'clock, because I didn't say 3. I said 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock. With an F sound instead of a T8. And so I couldn't figure out why they kept asking me the time. So it's that sort of thing again, where I'm in this situation where they're all teaching me. They're all hoping for me to teach them and speak to them and talk to them and learn different things from them. But also, I'd gone to Catholic school all my life. And I get to America, 8th grade, 13, 14 years old, and there are 2 kids there who are pregnant. One's on his 2nd kid. And so for me, this is like mind-boggling that this can be happening, because we don't have sex at this age, do we? No. And so again, a completely different world.
So how did you navigate that world? What did you do? Because you were a smart kid. How do you navigate all of this? Was it wanted attention, unwanted attention? How do you navigate it as a shy kid in a new place? What do you do?
I had my eyes on the prize, Wayne.
What was your prize?
My parents had given me 2 instructions when I was a kid growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Look after your brother, get good grades.
Mm-hmm.
So I got good grades.
Mm-hmm.
I got great grades in everything. I remember when I first got to America, one of the instructions that I was given, one of the first things I said within the first 6 months of me being there, was one of the other Black kids said to me, oh, well, universities start looking at your grades from 9th grade. And I thought, what? Okay, right. I'm going to get down to business then. No, I mean, it's not like I wasn't already getting mostly A's, but those mostly A's went to straight A's from then onwards. I'm like, I'm going to focus, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to join all the clubs that you're supposed to join to get a well-rounded being, to be a human being. So I was in the theatre club, I was in the choir, I played football, I played softball. I mean, I was the vice president of the Honor Society by the time I graduated. I did everything. I was managing the school store. I mean, so I focused on what I needed to get done. And that gave me tasks. And so, you know, like, if there's one thing that my mother taught me, is to be a good host, right? And so if there's a party, I have a job to do so I can experience that party, because I have a task, I have a job to do. If I have something to focus on, then I'm good to go. So in school, I found stuff to do. I remember one year, my 9th grade deal, and the science teacher, the head of department, had hurt her back really badly, so she was barely moving around the room. And we arrived in class and she'd had the delivery of all the science supplies for the year to her room. And she was, you know, she's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I spent the next week with me and my best friend helping her unpack, deliver, and sort out all of these products and materials, because it was something for me to do. I didn't have to go play with the kids, right? So it was a task. I took on a task, and with the task, I was able to function. So that's what I did.
So do you think in taking on these tasks, do you think it was kind of like, because you said you didn't get that sense of belonging until you got to university, so do you think that these tasks were almost part of a substitution process? I don't know.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't know how to engage with the other kids when I was younger in England. It was, you know, partially because I was different in one way or another, and I was treated as such. Mm-hmm. And when I got to DC, it was because I was terrified. I didn't know what to do, right? I don't know what to do in this space. I was terrified. And so if I found something to do, then at least that was my way of being part of the environment. I could be part of the wallpaper then, and that was easy. That was useful. The thing about this, though, is when you get to know the teachers, they get to know you, and so you stand out. And so I feel like the teachers often adopted me. I remember my school teachers, and I remember the way that they picked me up and they lifted me up and they took me into their arms and carried me along, because I had a really tough time, particularly once I got to senior high school in America. And so this group of women, these Black women who just held me, and that was a feeling that I understand retrospectively
Right.
was coming to me. But at the time, I just did what I was supposed to do. I was focused on getting the job done.
So you mentioned about the fact that in senior high, in senior, so from what, around age 16 upwards?
Yeah, exactly. 16 onwards. Yeah.
Yeah. That you had a particular rough time, but there was these Black women who held you up. Can you elaborate on that? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Bonner, Dr. Ross, Dr. Ross. Yeah, I mean, like Dr. Booker, all of these amazing people. And I wasn't faring well. I was this great student who was having, in some ways, a bit of a breakdown. I was floundering in a lot of ways. And so I got to America, and I couldn't go to university. I didn't have the right papers in order to be able to get federal aid in order to be able to go to university. And so I found that out in senior year. Now, I worked through 10th grade, 11th grade, as I said, joined everything, participated in everything. When you participate and join things, you get to know the sponsors of those things or the teachers really well. I excelled in school. I entered 4 science fair projects and won prizes for 4 science fair projects. So my teachers, they knew me. They knew me. I was getting attention. I won writing awards, and I won theatre awards, and so I got to know people. But at senior year, when I found out that, and I'd applied to Dartmouth for my college in the States, and I was shortlisted. I was waitlisted, sorry, and it turned out because I couldn't get federal aid, they weren't going to take me. And it was a crushing blow for somebody. I'd spent my whole life doing everything I could possibly do in order to go to university, and I wasn't going to be able to go. And I had no way to fix this. There was no way for me to fix that.
So it was something outside of your control. Everything else that you could have done, you had done, got the grades, participated in societies, all of those things, and then something beyond your control meant that kind of like your dream of going to university was then crushing.
It was done. It was over. And because I didn't have the right papers, I couldn't just go get a job either. So there was for me no future, and I got quite severely depressed. Actually, I got really depressed and quite a melt. And because that happens in sort of December, January, that's the middle of the year.
Yeah.
And my teachers noticed, and they picked me up and they looked after me. And what I didn't learn until much later was that they had taken up a collection to pay for a lawyer for me, so that I could start thinking about sorting out my paperwork. In the end, when I was able to go to college, it was because a headhunter saw me operating. I volunteered to fix computers at my school. And in volunteering to fix computers at my school, I was there when the headhunter walked past. And when I asked my guidance counselor, it was all right for me to go and sort out your computer, the headhunter said, "Who's that?" And next thing I knew, I had a full ride at college. And not only were they giving me and paying for all my fees, they were paying for my solicitor, and they were paying for me to apply for my papers. And so all of a sudden I had a way out. So this community picked me up, carried me along, and pushed me off on my way. And it was amazing. But like I said, in the headspace that I was in at the time, I didn't see that. I didn't recognize that. I couldn't take it in. Right. I took the lift and I went.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
So there's something you just said there, was that in the headspace that you were, you couldn't fathom, I'm not going to say the grace and favor, but you couldn't fathom the opportunity. You knew it was a great opportunity, but you couldn't fathom the extent of it. Is that right?
I couldn't. So the opportunity to go to university, I remember when I put in the application, I thought, I was skeptical. Like, yeah, right, I don't believe this for 1 second. And I remember writing the application because I'd done a dozen before already, right? So I knew what I was going to put, so I didn't write anything new. I just copied and pasted these applications, the same thing, and I sent it off. And whatever period it was later, and because what they said was I needed to apply what's called early decision. So you sort of apply in September and you get notified by November that you've got a place.
Yeah.
So I'm no longer a student. I'm working as a researcher in a neuroscience lab.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get this letter back in November saying, you've got a place. And I thought, oh, okay. Now what do I do? Because I don't have other students around me who are going to be the same thing, because I'm not a student anymore.
Yeah.
I've got my colleagues at work. I'm trying to figure out how to make a living. And, the army was the one and only place I could work, because I was given a student stipend and it was off the books in a different way. And so just thought, okay, right, well, okay. And so I prepared my stuff, planned my departure. And a year later, I headed off. I didn't hear another thing really from the university, because they were like, we got you now.
Yeah.
We don't need to sell you on any open days or any come visits or anything like that. You're ours, so just come. Just come. And so when I finally did get there, it was probably the most amazing place for me to be, but it was again Vermont, which was, at the time I looked up the stats, and it was 99.7% white in the state. Now, the university was a bit more diverse than that, but it was still back again where I'd been.
So it's kind of like you'd gone from a predominantly white space into a black space, being embraced, and then you were going back into another white space, right? But they were welcoming you in. How did they welcome you? How did you feel within that new environment, considering all the fact that they had said, we want you? How did they make you feel like, we want you? Did they do that?
It's fascinating, because majority of the people I worked with were white women at my college and university, and they are some of the most amazing people who I experienced and spent time with. They were happy to see me. Hi, I mean, like, the genuine happiness on their faces and in their voices. And it never went away. The whole time that I was there, it never went away. And they said, what do you need? And they helped me get whatever it was I needed at any point in time. And they supported me in ways that I didn't realize. I had been homeless after high school, and my English teacher took me in, and I lived with her for a while. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until many years later, I remember calling her from university, because I was lonely. I didn't have good contact with my family. And I remember calling her at a couple of different points, and just to say hello, just to say, hi, how are you? How's it going? And keep in touch. And she would say to me, oh, hi, it's great to hear from you. It's wonderfully wonderful. Like, how are you doing? How is everything? Do you need any money? Can I send you some cash? And I was just thinking, oh, she thinks I'm only calling her for her money. And so I stopped calling her. And that's sort of indicative of where my mindset, my frame of mind was and reference was at that time, was I didn't recognize that she was loving me in her way and how she did that. And I didn't see that when I was at Middlebury in Vermont, and I didn't recognize that at the time. But many, many years later, I thought, oh, I get it. I understand. You're holding me. And I recognize, and I've called her since then. We're in touch. I speak to her regularly, my English teacher, and I'm in touch. I'm going to a friend's wedding, to my cousin's wedding in a few weeks' time, and then I'll see some of my old teachers and the old people who I went to university with, who were the South. So they made me feel like I belonged there, and that they were going to make sure I carried along on this path.
So I'm thinking about, I'm wary of time. I want to talk to you for ages, and we've already spoken for umpteen hours already, and there's so much which I want to unpack. Because that was that realization for you. It was, you were growing up. You were trying to, from what you're saying, from what I'm hearing, is that you were trying to understand the world which you are now facing. Okay, so I think Wayne, I was trying to survive. Right. Okay. I was very much focused on surviving to get to the next step, to get to the next step, to the next step, so that I could be independent and live on my own, and I could be safe. That's what I was looking for. And nothing else penetrated that need to be safe.
Nothing else got in beyond that. And that, for me, I think, is what was happening. I didn't at the time know that, but that's what the focus was about.
So where do you think that you talk about this safety? Where do you think that desire for safety was coming from? You also mentioned that for a brief period you were homeless. Was that part of that kind of like, I need to secure, and education was a pathway that you saw as a way to that level of security?
Yeah, I mean, I found for me that, I had a difficult time with family, and I found that I couldn't rely on them. And when that happens, you have to find a way to survive yourself. And so that concept and idea of finding safety was about, how do I make sure I can look after myself? And so looking after me meant I needed to be able to afford enough money to do that.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that was to achieve the goals that I'd set out for myself. So that's why I was working in that direction. That focus, that concept is trying to survive and find a way to be able to be safe. That's where that came from.
Okay. What were you studying? What in terms of this end goal objective, eyes on the prize? What was the prize? What did you want to be? You mentioned about neuroscience, the science fairs. You were doing everything. So where were you ending? Where was your end objective?
When I was 5 years old and my aunt left to go to America, she was going to be a doctor. So I thought, oh, I need to decide what I want to do with my life. So my 5-year-old self thought about all the careers she knew about, and she said, well, you could be a traffic warden, but they do too much walking, so you don't want to be a traffic warden. Or you could be a police officer, but I don't want to get shot, and so I don't want to be a police officer. And then I thought, well, I guess I could be a doctor. That seems cool. Okay, I'll be a doctor. So when I was 5, I decided I was going to be a doctor. And all the way through my life, I remember evaluating and thinking to myself when I was 10, do I still want to be a doctor? And I remember thinking the same thing again when I was 15, I still want to be a doctor. And I was good at the sciences. I was good at maths. They were my home space. But I was also really good at literature. I was writing stories, full stories from the age of 5 and 6 years old. Detail. I remember this story about a giant in a cave and a see-through mirror that you see in the police. There's a whole lot of creativity somewhere in the back of this head. So when I went to university, the plan was, and as I said, at high school I did theatre and science theatre and writing kind of. Yeah. So the plan was I'll double major in English and biology. So when I got to university, that was the plan. But I got sick while I was there, and I was later diagnosed with lupus and later re-diagnosed with fibromyalgia, but at the time I just couldn't function, and so I had to drop out. And I remember dropping out and having a really, really tough year on my own, because all the people I knew were in DC or were at university studying, and I wasn't anymore. I was working a part-time job and trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. And I had what I like to call a bit of an epiphany, and I'm not a religious person at this point in time, but it was a sort of awakening for me. And I decided at that point that I didn't need to graduate with a degree in biology. I needed to graduate, and so it was okay to just do English and have some fun and take whatever sort of electives, because biology requires an additional 11 courses, and so I thought, oh, that means I've got 12 extra credits I can do for fun. And as I finished those courses for fun, I was told that I had taken all courses in women's and gender studies. And that if I did a second thesis on top of my English thesis, I could have a double major in English and women's and gender studies. And so those are the two things that I really did end up graduating with. And so that's wasn't where I went to do. That wasn't, the plan was, okay, so if you need to do medical school later, you can do an access course afterwards, but graduate, focus on that and get that done, and you can do everything else later. And the second thing that happened in that epiphany was I came out. And so that part of my identity that got released, and, to myself and to the rest of my psyche that I hadn't realized was there, was another part of the thing that happened in that period of time. So I went in with this whole other plan and came out in a lot of ways a whole different person.
Okay. You've already said earlier about that coming out, but tell us about this epiphany. What was it then? What helped you? Because you've had a total pivot almost from when you went in to where you've come out. And what was that for you?
I remember going when I first got to the States, and within a year or so, my best friend had written to me a letter, and she said, "Lenna, sit down." She's very serious, and she told me that my friends, one of the girls in my class was pregnant, and so had been sick, and I was like, because like, and she'd been on a date with a boy, and I thought, oh, okay, and I thought to myself, oh, okay, we're dating now. Okay, I guess. Right, I must be a late bloomer then. It's fine, it'll happen later. I'm not really interested in boys, but I'm busy anyway. And I got a bit older and I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm asexual. And yeah, that's what it is. I'm still not interested in boys, so I must be asexual. And this lesbian thing just was like so far away from my brain. I'm not stupid. Somewhere in my head knew that this thing existed, but I knew about gay men, but the concept and idea of women and women just, my brain, I think, in some ways must have been protecting me from the information because I just wasn't ready to hear it yet. And so that moment, I went to university and there were all these queer people there. And I thought, oh, this is cool. That's nice. And this person said, oh, you're a lesbian. I'm like, oh, no, not me. No, I know people say that sometimes. And that person said, oh, you're a lesbian. I'm like, no, not me. It's okay. It's fine. I'm just, no, not me. So it's cool. It's okay, good. And so whilst I'm having this massive mental health breakdown in the year off, my brain says, okay, it's time. it's time. It's time. You can have this information now. So it was a big moment for me in terms of learning who I was and taking on that moment. I remember going back to one of the teachers who one of the staff at the university, and she'd been very open and very friendly with me, talked to me about a lot of stuff. And she said, you look changed, you look a bit different. Is everything okay? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, what's going on? Is it something about who you were, about you? Is it about something that's going on? I said, and, yeah. And she said to me, well, okay, well, let's start with who you are. Let's start with identity. And she said, okay, what's your race or ethnicity? And I went, and I smiled because I thought, she knows. She knows. And I said, I'm Black. And she said, okay, what about your gender? What about you? And I said, I'm a woman. And she said, well, what about your sexual orientation? And I said, I don't know. I'm not sure. And she goes, okay. And so it was one of those moments where I just felt like she saw me and she'd seen me and I didn't know. And I didn't realize, but in that moment, she saw me. And within a month of coming out, and she was the first person I told anything. Yeah. But within a month of coming out, I'd been so I was sitting on the bus. There's a poster and a sign for a LGBT group on the bus. And I remember sitting on the bus going like this, looking out the corner of my eyes at this sign, memorizing the phone number. So I didn't want anybody to notice that I was looking at this sign, but I thought I just want to. And so eventually calling them, going to that first night there. A month later, there was a big overnight weekend stay at my college. So I was there. Then there was all queer town meeting event, which happened across town. And I was there. And I remember pulling into that parking lot and every single car had a rainbow sticker on it. I just thought, this is awesome. This is so cool. But that was the step and the step and the step, which took me then to the Black lesbians at Now in DC later on that year. So
in all of this kind of like discussion, it was at that point now that you really, I'm going to ask the question, was it at that point that you then found a sense of belonging?
I think I had the headspace, the capacity to take in that feeling, because I didn't before. Because I feel like it had been so alien to me when I was a child. I hadn't ever looked for it again. It hadn't been a familiar experience elsewhere. I had friends. I had a few people who I hung out with, people by circumstance we'd been thrown together for whatever reason. But it was sort of like, okay, yeah, this is what you do. You talk to the other person who doesn't have any other people to talk to, right? Yeah. But that moment, that coming out and then experiencing that and then going to DC and being in that space, in that room. There's a book called Does Your Mama Know by Lisa Moore. and it's Black lesbian coming out stories. And I read that thing from cover to cover in no time flat, because that had meant so much to me. It meant so much in terms of my experience. And the other resource was the Mosaics to Watch Out For by Alison Bechdel. And I hadn't realized it until I'd gone to DC, but the Black characters she'd drawn, who actually looked like Black women, were just so, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Look, they're great. And they really felt like people.
Yeah.
Too often you see Black characters drawn and they're terrible. I just had no idea what's going on. But they were so real. And so being in that space in DC was everything. And it felt like coming home. And I think that was really important, because that feeling I didn't feel like I'd had before. Coming home, that was the first time I really felt it. That belonging, being able to see people like me and people who I didn't have to explain so many things to.
So I'm wary of time, so I'm gonna, but you know what? I need to know how you went from that space there to the EDI space and the strategic management and the strategies for change. What was it that then motivated you or brought you to this place where you are now?
Accident, Wayne. Accident. Clearly this stuff is important to me, because I volunteered for various different organizations thereafter. I volunteered for LGBT charities, for organizations that were supported, for example, adopted kids from racialized minority groups. I volunteered for disability charities, but also whilst I was still trying to go to medical school, right? So I graduated, I got my degree. I worked as a medical secretary because I was trying to apply, and it turned out that having been outside of the country for more than 6 years, I was no longer classed a UK citizen. And so all of a sudden I needed a whole lot more money than I thought I needed in order to go to medical school. So that had to go on the back burner whilst I tried to save money whilst living in London. And in that time, I got really ill again and was quite sick and didn't really leave my home for a few years. I eventually got some medication that worked. And after that period of time, my mentor, my old boss, the medical secretary, he said to me, you should do an MBA. I thought, okay, I don't know what an MBA is. But I plan to go to medical school for 30 years of my life. That has not worked out. I need to do something else. So sure, I will go do an MBA. And there happened to be a open day fair at UCL. I think it was a couple of weeks later. And so I went to that. And one of the two universities that I thought that, were within my range were London South Bank and Kingston. So I went to Kingston, who were having an open day on the next following Sunday. So I went to the Sunday opening day at Kingston. I applied on Tuesday. I was accepted on Thursday, and I started on Monday.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess I was supposed to do an MBA. And I remember my English teacher, that one who took me in, saying, Lenna, you need to go into business. And me going, nah. But I went to do this MBA, and I just thought, okay, I'll do this. And they had a great careers advisor, and she said, so what do you want to do? And I gave her my CV. I said, I don't know. And she looked at my CV and she said, oh, you've done lots of EDI stuff. And why don't you do that? And I thought, well, who's ever going to pay me to do that? Yeah. As too many of people like us say, right? She rewrote my CV. I had a job working at Cambridge 6 months later. And I went from there to the Royal Society and then onwards. And with my MBA background, combined with that D&I experience and that, I have since then built a portfolio career as a non-executive director for a variety of different organizations, as a director of diversity, inclusion, strategic change. So I'm helping organizations build actual practical ways of delivering D&I change. We spend a lot of money in this sphere on stuff that we never know is going to work. And what I would do is work with organizations to make sure that they can monitor progress, make changes. We use strategy and everything else in the business world. Why wouldn't we use it for this as well?
So what would you say? Now I'm really, you've kind of like poked the dragon or something. You poked
a tangent for you, and here's another one.
So tell me, what would you say are some of the major challenges that, from your experiences, that you have encountered in the EDI space?
The number one thing is fear. People don't want to get it wrong, so they don't do anything. It's that paralyzing nature of what you're doing. So I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to be quiet over here and hope nobody notices that I don't know anything. So, so that's one of the key things I think that I've come across. One of the other things is the people who think they know everything. Oh no, I don't need to learn. I know I'm fine. I've got it. I've got this. I need to learn. I've been doing this for 25 years. You know, I started my first D&I job in 1997 in university, disabilities office. You know, I still have things to learn. Everybody does. And that's my first thing I try and teach people, is that the humility around learning and knowledge. I don't understand why anybody would say about any other subject there is on the world that they know everything or that they know enough. You can never know enough about a subject. Like, whether or not you want to learn more is up to you, but you can never know enough. And so those are the two key things that I've come across. And then you've got the organizations who say they want stuff but won't resource it. And the reality is you can't get anywhere unless you resource it. And that's prioritizing, means that you're prioritizing something. So I talk to people about how they prioritize this work based on where they actually want to be. Do you want to be compliant, follow the rules, be in line with the law? Do you want to be conventional, do what everybody else at your level is doing, or do you want to be innovative, cutting edge, and go beyond? Because if you want to, and a lot of these organizations, we want to be best, right? And if they want to be the best, I'm like, okay, but are you putting, you know, the money behind it in order to do that? So those are the conversations that I start with organizations.
Now, we're going to have another conversation. We're going to close off this one, right? But just because of time. And what I normally do is I do open up for questions from so if there are anyone, or is there, if anyone does have questions which they'd like to ask Lenna, then put your hands up now. I still am very interested in this EDI space. I don't want you to name any names or any organizations, but what has been one of the most challenging encounters that you've had, where kind of like expectations don't match up with the reality of what they're willing to do, if that makes sense?
I've worked with a lot of organizations that are very old, and they know they need to change, but you've got conflicting groups of people in terms of whether or not they do want to change. And so working with organizations that are saying in some parts, let's do this, and other parts of the organization pushing back and saying, no. And you've all heard the term, you know, merit. Like, well, you all know that most of you didn't get here on merit alone, but let's not go into that. And so working against tradition in a lot of ways is key. I think there's a lot of people who still don't understand that it's not about a leg up. That's not what it's about. It's about making sure that we're not causing inequality with our systems and processes, right? And so the imbalance that's in our system is not natural. It's not a naturally occurring event. It occurs because of the systems and the way that they operate currently. And I think that people don't realize that the nature of that. Well, I had a tough time and I made it. You had a different kind of tough time. You did, but it was a different kind of tough time. And so how do we address that difference and understanding the experience? And so those are some of the key things. But I think the hardest thing to work through are the people who say yes. And I want this EDI stuff, but I'm not going to do anything about it. But I want this EDI stuff, but don't change that. I also want this EDI stuff, but I don't think you should do that. I'd rather somebody just say, nah. Right? And so once I figure that out, once I see the incongruence between the yes, and I just don't work with them anymore. I'm now in a position where I can just say, no, I'm not going to work with you because I'm not going to sanitize what you're not doing. And that's an opportunity that I have now.
I like the way that you put that. I really like the way, really like the way that you put that, is that by your presence being there, it's condoning a practice which doesn't actually want change. Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, exactly that.
I don't know if you've read this book, Peacock in the Land of Penguins.
No.
right? Just Peacock in the Land of Penguins. They hide the penguins have a problem, right? And the penguins have a problem, and the peacock comes in and says, "Well, I can solve your problem." And they said, "Oh, great, 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 great." And as the peacock goes around to start trying to help to solve the problems, the other penguins are saying to him, "Well, you're a little bit taller than us penguins, right? Us penguins are quite short. You're a bit more colorful than us penguins, right? Us penguins we like black and white, right?" And it kind of like goes on. All of the things which they celebrated about the penguin being about the peacock being different, when the peacock went to try to do his job, those are all the things which the penguins then said, "No, you can't use in order to solve the problem," right? So it's a children's story, but I think it's a children's story talking about Edie and I, right?
I feel that so much so. I feel that. Yeah. I'm just not interested. If you, I think I'm pretty good at what I do in terms of the work that I engage in, and I don't want to work with organizations that are not telling the truth. So,
yeah. Right. I'm gonna talk to you afterwards, right? But I'm just wary of time, right? I'm gonna ask you my two final questions because you've already given me so much insights already. But I'm gonna ask two questions. They're kind of like the opposite sides of the same question. And the question is, what advice would you have given to your younger self? Now, there's many stages about your younger self, but whichever one you pick, what advice would you give them? And then the second part would be, of your younger self, what do you think they would look at you now and say, "Wow"?
So it's funny because I think there's a web series called "It'll Get Better," or "It Gets Better," something like that. And it's a whole bunch of people, including loads of famous people, celebrities and stuff like that, talking to young teenagers. It started out as an LGBTQ plus thing. And it's about, it's hard now, but it'll get better later. It's hard now, but it'll get better later now. I think for me, everything that I went through growing up makes me able to do what I do now. It gives me the experiences that so many people who I work with are experiencing today. I'm a Black, disabled, queer woman, right? I come from a council estate in Southeast Bermondsey. I've got, there's a list there that people will recognize. And so I've got those experiences, but I was bullied constantly as a kid. And so I volunteer for diversity role models, doing anti-homophobic, biphobic, transphobic bullying in schools. I help organizations develop their own plans around making sure that everybody feels included, passing on that experience that I had, even though I didn't realize I was having, to other people, so that they understand this is what you need to do in order to make things safe for that person. They're passive, they're small things, the right kind of pictures on the walls, the right kind of activities and events that are happening, making sure everybody's welcomed warmly, genuinely, sincerely. All those really tiny things that are really easy to do are built into all of the programs and aspects of things that I do. So for me, I think I wouldn't give advice to myself. Well, I'm allergic to mold. It would have been nice to know that sooner. I had really bad eczema growing up, but even the massive amounts of facial disfigurement that I experienced give me an experience that other people I can use to share with other people and share my experience from that perspective. And so I wouldn't give any advice to my younger self. I made it here. I'm here today. I'm doing this amazing thing that I mean, how many people get to say that they get paid to do the thing they love? Not many. And I do. I get paid to do something that I'm passionate about, that it's important to me and that I'm good at. So I'd leave it at that. And in terms of the wow, I think I'm going to go with my hair, because
Okay.
It's cool. It's taken me a long time to find it and to get to this place, but like I'm happy with this. I know that my younger self would have been happy with this too, right? They'd be like, that's cool. That's what I'm going for. That's what I'm going for. My hair.
That's for me. People say, Wayne, you don't have any hair, right? I said, I don't have any hair because I cut it short.
You
this
cut
is
it
the
short.
style I like.
There you go. Choice. Choice. Like, yes. I'm like, I found me the right barber. Life is good.
Lenna, it's been absolutely wonderful having you as our guest on Belonging.
Thank you for having me.
Right?
Man.
And I know that we're going to be in connect. We found each other now, right? And there's a connection, right? And I really do appreciate the advice which you've given. Inadvertently, you don't know, but inadvertently, the advice that you have given has been absolutely brilliant. Okay,
thank you. I appreciate that.
Right, and keep doing what you're doing, because I think, you know what, it is Black History Month, and the
I see.
Right, and in Black History Month this month it is saluting our sisters, right? And you know what? I'm going to stand up and I'm going to salute, right? Because I think what you've been doing, it deserves a round of applause in terms of you're extending the boundaries. You're doing things differently. You're doing the things that the way that you want them, but you're being impactful as well. So I really want to say, continue doing what you're doing, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. All right, I'm gonna just share with everyone what we're going to be doing next week. So let me just, and Lenna will stay on, and we will then have a little after party, as it were. Right. So next week we're going to have Wendy Rock, and she's a senior teaching fellow in the Faculty of Medicine and School of Public Health. And she'll be here with us next week and sharing her story. If you have missed any of the other episodes, then please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. And I do say this every week, and I do mean it every week. This was our first 100. We are rapidly moving towards our second 100. And what I would like to just say is a big thank you to all of these wonderful individuals who were willing to share their stories, because without their stories, we wouldn't be able to understand what it is for individuals to feel that they belong. So until next week, I want to just say a really big thank you, and continue finding your belonging.